right, everybody. Welcome back to another session of HR Heretics. It's great to have you. We're so happy to be here with Christine Centa, who's the Chief People Officer at HashiCorp. I'm a big fan of HashiCorp, have been for a while. Can't wait to get into this. Prior to HashiCorp, for the past about 5 years, she was at Pivotal Software in senior leadership roles. And then before that, almost had a 12-year stint at EMC, which got picked up by Dell. Is that right, Christine? Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us. I know you're super slammed because you and Dave are building like crazy over at HashiCorp. Before we started recording, Christine tried to apologize to us because sometimes she apparently swears, which if you're an avid listener, you're laughing right now because it's kind of like our second language.
Well, no, I was listening and I heard you all doing that. I'm like, oh, these are my peeps. And then I was like, oh, but what if I do it? Well, I'll go on the podcast. I was like, so like my team knows and the leadership team knows, but
you just added her doing her.
My kids definitely know.
To her employee base, Kelli. Like,
it's okay.
They're just like, who is this person now? Like,
they know, just like kids know their parents swear. They know. And I just want to thank you because I was considering trying to swear less, and now I'm not going to anymore. So let's get into it, Nolan. Where do we want to start?
I'd actually love to start with you're in the seat now after a career that was almost exclusively in compensation. And I think you've been in the seat now for about 7-8 months. How's that transition been for you?
Yeah, actually, it's been relatively natural, to be honest. I was able to start my career in a rotational program. So I did a lot of different roles within HR, and I did find my niche in comp back in the later EMC days and truly loved the analytical components and being able to drive business decisions based on data. And I definitely like the compensation element of the rewards. But the job I had back at Pivotal Software and the HashiCorp job was definitely broader than just comp, right? So over time, I really was able to kind of build all the other components, right? So it's broader into total rewards. It got into people operations. It got into global mobility. Quite frankly, they made me do the HR for HR job. We all love that one. So I never really got rid of the business partner part. So it was an okay. It was a pretty seamless transition, I think. I think that, we talk about the importance of having, knowing the areas that you know, right? And you can be dangerous. And like the areas you grew up with that you really know, the areas you know enough that you be dangerous. And then the elements where you just haven't played before. And I was very lucky moving into the seat, like the areas that I hadn't really played before, or just like in the recruiting arena, like super strong team. So it really was, it worked well for this particular job. So very lucky.
We've been talking a lot about comp on the show, and I think there's a lot going on. There's a lot of data right now from Carta that shows that the comp has actually remained very flat over the last couple of years as it relates to a cash standpoint. In equity, we've actually seen for venture-backed tech companies, it go down significantly, especially for new hire grants. What are you guys seeing in compensation right now, and how are you guys thinking about it given the macroeconomic environment?
Yeah, I think that seeing pretty similar things. I think from a comp perspective, things have stayed pretty relatively flat. I mean, granted, we were still kind of in our growth phase for a while, so you're always kind of trying to play catch up in that element. So we were able to continue to bump folks up and not have to do anything like where nothing, flat or no increases or anything like that. So that was good, dip in kind of what the equity offerings were going to be. And it was interesting because we were coming out of that period where, and I have done a lot of equity modeling over the years in a variety of different jobs. And I'm like, I'm not trusting that data. I think there's a lag, market data lag, because it was rough. It was rough for a lot of companies with their equity burn. Really rough for a couple of years.
I lived it as well, Christine. I mean, I think, those of us who are in the series E, maybe going to go public in the next year, 18 months, it was just a really tough time to get caught in, what I call no man's land when you're surfing. Like you got to go out or all the way in. You can't, and that's a tough place to get caught. You brought up a good point around the equity and the lag. That's the point that you brought up, that so many of us have lived because we live and die by market data and comp data and this. How have you done that? Have you been like a very loud voice, like we're not going to do the lag, we're going to balance this, is what I'm hearing and seeing on the street? How have you influenced that, given I know a lot of companies want to go by the book when it comes to market data?
Yeah, I think that I've been a part of. I think a lot of us are successful in the roles that we are when we try to build that network in the role that we're in, right? So you try to like tap your colleagues at other companies, and I've been really lucky to kind of get involved in like comp consortiums and like a bunch of other folks that I really trust out in the industry, and staying close to colleagues other areas. So we have these conversations all the time, just like, we're having these conversations. I love like this forums. This is the stuff that we need to be doing as HR professionals, talking about this stuff all the time. I love this podcast. So we were doing a couple things. When I was tapping other companies, kind of like, what are you seeing? I was definitely talking to like our comp consultants for sure. I'm like, what are you seeing as you're trying to hire people? You can get a lot of really great information from your recruiters. I mean, I know a lot of times they are saying, we need more, we need more, we need more, we need more. That's always the answer. But ultimately, like if you poke at it and you're kind of like, are you sure? The other thing that we did, which I thought was good, was, we had our ranges, and then we started to do it almost like in a trial function where I was like, you know what? Here's our range, but you can't go over midpoint anymore. Let's spend the next 2 months midpoint and below. Tell me how it goes.
I love it. Experimenting, testing.
Yeah, we tested it. So we tested it for a couple of months, midpoint to low, and we were fine. And so I kind of laid out this process so that we could test it for a period, and we were fine. Now, granted, we were growing. We had a great story, and folks were coming here for the excitement and the work that they were going to get to do in the culture. So I did have that added element that obviously helped from a value prop perspective, but yeah, I mean, we just tested it and see how it went, and it worked.
The recruiters are such an important point. One of my companies, I mean, Nolan, you have an opinion on this. Like, I was like, I want everyone to record every no name, you can redact that, but I want every candidate we talk to, what's the street value? What are they making, et cetera? And the stark differences between those ranges, some of them were very wide, those gaps.
Yeah, recruiting tends to have a really good pulse on what's going on in the market. But Christine, to your point, we also tend to just be like, well, like, we can just solve all the problems with comp. So just like increase comp, and then these problems go away. And then you have all these issues with internal equity. And so it doesn't actually really solve any problems. It just solves the getting in the door problem. I think you mentioned a really good point though, that at Hashi, you guys had been growing super fast. So I'm assuming what you told the team was, look, there's an upside story here that needs to be pitched a little bit better, but really pitching the growth of the equity and how we are essentially an outlier compared to other companies in this market. Is that like a fair characterization of how you guys thought about it?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely thought about it in that way. But I also think just from a negotiation perspective, for your recruiters, I mean, they will leverage, like they will leverage what they have. So if you tell them, you can close this candidate faster if you just stay at midpoint. Stay at midpoint, go ahead, go. If you have to go above it, make a compelling case and tell me why. So it also made it hard. I just made it a little harder. Just made it a little bit harder.
Yeah, a little extra red tape changes everything. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. I just made it a little bit harder.
Well, it's just a constraint, right? Like,
yeah.
You add a couple of constraints, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we can actually like do these things.
And then we also discovered areas where it was like, okay, this particular country or this particular job, you got to see patterns too, which also informed us of like areas we needed to adjust.
Yeah. I want to get your take on some of these new grants that we're seeing. So I know Coinbase is doing this, Coinbase, Lyft. I think DoorDash is now doing it. They're doing 1-year grants for new hires. And then they're doing annual refreshes. A couple of other companies like Amazon is doing like the backloaded grant. What is your take on, how companies are now moving away from the standard 4-year vest, 25% vest every year?
Yeah, I think like a lot of the HR practices or policies, we're really starting to get to that phase where, and I've heard you all say this like a bunch of times, like it's not just the best practice and we just apply it to wherever we go. It's really trying to figure out what is going to work given the current state phase that your company is in, how mature it is, how big it is, how many countries, public, private. I mean, it's just, there's so many different factors, right? It could be a short-term fix. It may not be something you want to do forever. And then you also kind of burden yourself with that. Okay, now we got to re-up it the same amount for all those people again next year. Whereas if you're doing the bigger amounts for a longer period of time, right? Then you can also get at it where I'm not giving it to everybody that following year. I'm only giving it to half of our population because a bunch of them already have. So it has to be a really purposeful, long-term decision play to make sure you really are thinking through what does this mean for me next year and not just solving for today. And if it's something you can solve for in the long term or you're prepared for that, fine. But if you haven't thought about it, it's just going to create another issue for you the following year.
I'd love both your thoughts on this, and because I've been thinking about this a lot, and in my experience, equity and equity plans and et cetera is something that's extremely hard to change within a company. Comp committees and board. I mean, it's very sensitive. Yet I feel like it's something that should change more often. And I've thought about the 1-year grants, and I really, really like it. And I couldn't think about any other reason why we wouldn't do that besides what I think you were saying, Christine, is the administrative burden of having to re-up and look at it every year. And it's something to be on top of. Am I missing something? Like, why aren't we just doing this?
It's not necessarily the administrative burden. It's if you do a 1-year grant, right, and then year over year you do that consistently, it just means that you're on the hook, right, from a retention perspective to re-up them that following year, right? And also if you have someone, and also there's like a performance element to it in my mind too. So this year, this top talent, top performer, whatever, we're going to give them a really huge grant. It's going to be for this 1-year cycle. Okay, something happens in their life. Who knows? Maybe something happens and they're not quite as performing as well the following year. But now that entire grant is gone. So now it's do I give them the same? Do I give them a little? There's no tail.
Right.
There's no, you've lost it. So a lot of times what you look at, right, is this person compared to their unvested value and how long is that unvested value going to last? And now you don't have a tail.
And we miss the compounding approach, right? That compounding. I mean,
yes, that's right. You don't have it.
2 years might be an interesting solution to that. But yeah, the 4 just seems.
Or 3. I mean, just even if it's just, again, a stepped approach. I mean, so going from 4 to all of a sudden 1 and then having that be your forever, that seems, drastic unless it's a one time. I mean,
it's really interesting because, so I think in isolation, 1 and 2 sounds interesting, but when you're competing against companies that are offering 4-year grants and the employee has the opportunity to lock that grant in and then see upside with the company, for me, I actually think it's like really challenging for these companies to compete right now because valuations are kind of depressed. Most companies have taken the medicine. If I'm an employee, I'm like, now's the time. Like, now's the time for me to go lock in. And when you have a 1-year grant, I'm not locking in. I'm just riding with you every year and I'm getting mark to market every year, which is, how many people made their money as part of this last run up. The other thing I'll mention is that at Carta, when I first joined, we had 5-year grants. And what I learned about that, Christine, you'd made an offhanded comment about being, your board being frustrated or, just having to negotiate with them on getting increases to your pool. And with the 5-year grant, the issue that we had was that the pool size was a lot bigger every year just because it was over a 5-year period. And so all of this stuff is about trade-offs. But Christine, I did want to ask you about I think a lot of people don't really talk about how cumbersome it is to go to your board and to get an increase to the pool. It sounds like you've experienced that a little bit. So what is that like for you and how do you interact with the board as it relates to equity compensation?
Yeah. So again, super data driven, a lot of research goes into it and just a lot of proactive analysis and just staying on top of it too. So for me, we're reporting out on this all the time. Every time I meet with them, I'm showing information about where we're trending, where we're going, where all the assumptions that we're building into, where the ranges come from, why we're marketing, you know what I mean? So when I first joined, right, even though I wasn't in the CPO seat, I was, leading up rewards. So I've been with this comp committee and board for a while. So it really was in the early onset, just building up the credibility around why we're building it the way we're building it. And making sure it's kind of within that, that market range that they're comfortable with. So a lot of it, I think we were able to, and I remember like some of the shifts that I made were, taking things down. So that made that's an easier of support to get, right? I think though, where you get the challenge is the confirmation year over year when you're going in and saying, hey, here's the pool I need for this year. Here's where this is here's where I'm going to make adjustments to make sure we can stay within that window of appropriate burn. And then also remember to liken it to, again, phase. What phase are you in? And reminding them to like, you know what I mean? Because everyone comes at it from whatever experience that they've had. So it's really important to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row related to what is within the realm of ability to explain it to investors related to where we are as a company and what we're trying to accomplish.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Your workforce is both your organization's greatest strength and largest single cost. With Planful, it's easy to unlock the secrets of successful workforce planning so you and your HR team can make the right business decisions. Imagine using data-driven insights to develop accurate forecasts, close hiring gaps, and adjust talent acquisition plans collaboratively based on costs today and into the future. Planful lets you collaborate with colleagues in finance to understand the value your employees bring to the table. And the best part, you can get started with Planful in just weeks with minimal help from IT. Plus, with Planful, you get an endless runway. Planful grows with you, no matter how fast or large your team scales. Ready to transform your HR strategy? Join over 1,500 organizations worldwide who trust Planful as their go-to workforce planning software at planful.com/heretics. Real talk, most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts or get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes. I agree with all that. My 2 cents on that is, for sure, the biggest thing is often and the more data and more frequent check-ins, transparency, building that trust. Sometimes folks don't talk about this. They don't even see these people once a year, and it's like an enema, and so bringing them in as a part of that journey. And I don't know about you, but the thing that I've got tripped up on a lot is underestimating the pool needed for hiring. That always seemed to go over. And it's like, do you know what I mean? I don't know, and we got lucky because we made it up for in, attrition and shares going back in. Kudos again to the 4-year grant. But that hiring numbers, seem to always kind of be over budget.
Yeah, I think that, you want to be, so it's interesting. That's interesting because I feel like that's in one area that the modeling component, I always spent so much time on it for that exact reason, because I always wanted to come in under whatever I gave them, whatever it was. So from like an assumption perspective, it was really this combination of kind of, what are you assuming for attrition? What are you assuming for hiring, right? Because you've got your recruiting team making certain assumptions, right? Which is usually more hires than you're going to do. And you've got your finance team making certain assumptions, which is usually less. So I always just tried to come up, what are you doing? What do you think? And to try to come up with the balance basically in the middle.
Yeah, the market plays a big role. I mean, this, again, it was like 4.5 years ago when everyone was so different today.
Yeah. And we also we had for a while, like a pretty consistent attrition. Like it was pretty easy to kind of, yeah. So there was some, it was pretty predictable. Yeah.
You guys went public in 2021 and you had joined, I think, in 2020. what has been like the biggest change between the private version of Hashi and the public version of Hashi?
Great question.
I think it's like any company that's kind of scaling and such. I mean, we were still relatively small, right? When we went public. So it was, just post going public, and we really were just still hiring at just like an amazing clip. And so when we were thinking about that, so having gone through the IPO process before at Pivotal Software, like really laying in a lot of that scalability, like groundwork, right? Like your compliance and your reporting, getting all the right systems in place, and like doing all that quant prep and equity prep, right? There was a lot of things that, I kind of came in and like started to like bang through like pretty quickly, but there was still a lot more to do. Like I didn't feel like I was quite as prepared this time as I was the last time. So there was, I think the biggest shift was post that period was really getting the operational rigor in place related to a lot of processes. We were still kind of going through that post going public. And it's because we had grown at such a scale, and we were still growing, right? It was just get them in the door, get them in the door, get them in the door. And now it's a matter of like, okay, are we ramping everybody appropriately? Does everyone know what we're doing? Are all the managers enabled? And, have we gotten them the right things to sign? That kind of stuff. So I think there was more of a catch up mode from like a process perspective. And that was probably the biggest difference I saw. But I think though that, I think some would say that, that transition, you kind of start to see a shift almost in culture at that point in stage when people go post public, when they go public. But I feel like we did a really good job, like trying to stay as close to our principles and culture as we could. And I think that's kind of why we managed through a lot of the things that were kind of going on in the industry at the time, right? COVID was hitting right as soon as we went public. I think it was like a few, we were there, like we were in the midst of COVID. So it was kind of one of those where we were navigating that time. The Great Resignation was happening again. Luckily, we were in super successful mode, so we didn't really have a lot of folks exiting, but we were able to really maintain a lot of the elements of our principles and culture at that time with the remote work, et cetera.
Yeah. Were you able to maintain the shape of your talent and the right talent? Because sometimes even if those principles stay and whatnot, right, just the stamp of being public in people's minds. So it's time for me to go. I need to go. And that,
We absolutely saw that. We absolutely saw that post going public. You definitely have that contingent that's like, nope, I'm the startup team, that kind of stuff. And absolutely, yes, we absolutely. So Dave likes to talk about it as our CEO. He talks about it in phase shifts, right? So that definitely was a shift related to where we were and the growth that we were doing, right? And you can definitely see the difference in like whether that's your sales team or whatever, and kind of that level of what you want to do from a company phase perspective. So we did see a shift for sure.
Yeah, you had mentioned being fully remote. We're talking today. It's September 26th, and just last week, Amazon announced that they're going fully back to the office. How do you guys think about this remote versus in-office debate that we're unbelievably having again?
Yeah, we have a very unique history on this. So we're dealing with some different types of challenges, all related to this, but we're starting from a different point, right? So initially the company was built as a remote based, right? You did have G&A folks like in one office. So it was very much built in a culture of it was okay to work from home and people were remote. And so very writing based culture, very Slack happy culture, very Zoom happy culture, like all those things, the very, dedicated moments in time that you met with people and worked on stuff, very collaborative, Google Doc focus, all that kind of stuff. So, for us, when COVID hit, right, and companies were trying to figure out how do we go remote, like what do we do? We were all kind of like, well, just do this. Like, this is not hard. This isn't hard. This is how we do it. This works. Then when you start to hit that critical mass, right, and you're in, 20 countries around the world and all this kind of stuff, like it becomes more, you really have to be super deliberate and intentional to maintain a remote work environment. So I think what all these other companies are grappling with is they were in office. And then they had to go remote, and people, loved the different components of what that meant for their lifestyle. And now it's reverting back to, okay, we need to make sure we're productive. We need to make sure we're building relationships and having community and being collaborative. And so bringing people back, and then people having that jarring feet, where we're at the similar phase where we're thinking through, we need collaboration. We need to build community. We need to make sure there are intentional connection points for people. And there is only so much you can do that you have to do. There's a bunch of stuff online that we can do, and we're working through those things, and we have a bunch of strategies there. But there is an element of that human interaction where you do get those real insights that you truly need to have as a leader, as a team leader, manager. So for us, we're going at it in a couple different ways. So because we don't have offices to tell everybody, so we can't do that.
Not one physical space, Christine?
We have a couple. Yeah, we have a couple. So we have one in San Francisco. We have one in Austin. We have one in India, and then we have one in Madrid. So we have some places that we've built over the years for very specific intentional teams and reasons. But for the most, it's remote. And even the folks who are, part of those locations, like they're home sometimes too. Like for me, I'm totally in this office a couple times a week, but I work from home a couple times a week too. So there really is that hybrid component. So for us, it's really building those online tools and intentional connection points, and then also enabling people to do offsites, get in-person time, and then also we were doing global meetup days for all of our where we have critical mass in a bunch of different cities where we don't have offices, and folks will purposely all come in on those particular days. Like one is actually today. So we have a bunch of people in the San Francisco office today.
Awesome. So just to shift gears a little bit, your background's incredible. Dave McJanet is an amazing leader, CEO, worked with him at GitHub. You have a growing, amazing product and organization, great culture. I want to get into what's not been great. Like what's been hard, if not for you, maybe for you and Dave together, for the company. Like where do you struggle, Christine? How do you deal with that? Like let's unpack the not so duckies and horsies part of this amazing journey you've been on.
Yeah, to be honest, part of that, the last topic we were going on related to, how we're figuring out how to continue to be remote. I mean, that definitely has not been easy in any way, shape, or form. It was kind of a discovery, I think, over the last few years as we've grown. It's like people really love it. It's part of our culture. It's so innate here, and it's so important to who we are and why people work here. But but there's a struggle. There is clearly a gap in how folks are feeling connected. And other companies, as I said, are dealing with it in other ways. But for us, like we have to crack this. Like folks need to feel engaged. They need to feel like a sense of belonging and connected. So that has been a bit of a stark realization, and definitely differing opinions. Just like out in the industry, there's so many differing opinions here. No, we got to keep it. We got to maintain it. Maybe we have to go to a hub strategy at some point. Do we have to do it? Do we not do it? When do we do it? Where do we go? So those conversations have been real.
How is that showing up? Like, how is the lack of connectedness showing up?
I think sometimes it's come up in a variety of ways where you might not see, you'll see a decision point, that's brought to the executive team or whatever. And we're like, oh, okay, like that's the decision. We make a decision. Okay, off we go. And then you discover like a really critical team that's part of implementing that and making that happen. Like there's a misalignment in kind of some of those decisions being made, right? And it's just because there hasn't been that opportunity to talk about it or collaborate. And whether that can be solved with simply solved by just building stronger relationships, And so it's like if there was better cross-functional collaboration across some teams, those things would have come up. And so it's a matter of how do you get those cross-functional relationships built? And again, if you're, really truly remote, how do you have to force that? You have to be really intentional. Like, oh, I joined the company. This is my job. I'm VP of whatever. To be successful in my job, I need to know who these people are, and I've got to go out and find them. I got to find them online. I got to find them in Workday. I got to type them in. I got to find them on Slack and make sure that I meet them, because I'm not going to see them at a meeting or a leadership. I'm not going to, right? You have to like really be super intentional. And that's definitely something that's been a struggle, which is why we're leaning in so heavily on it now. Let's see what else. So other things that haven't been rosy.
Any sticking points between you and Dave? Anything that's particularly spicy as far as philosophy or approach or?
Yeah, I think Dave is so much respect for him. Learned so much from this man. He is kind of known internally here as like a combination of like the professor and an accountant. So it's like so it's just
that sounds right.
So it's just like, so he thinks a lot in, frameworks and systems and results and inputs and outputs and that kind of thing. So I think just sometimes it's that, and as we're talking about, building community and connection and relationship and, wanting to, come up with costs like relatable and personable, like that kind of stuff. So I think that's probably been some of the stuff where he and I have been like, I'm like, something as simple as X would go a long way. I know you don't want to consider another holiday, but this one we really need to add. Like, I get it. You want people executing and working, but I promise adding this holiday is not going to make a difference in your productivity numbers. So I think it's been kind of some of that stuff.
I love that. I mean, I coach a lot of folks and I'm always like, listen, be a little selfish. Like you got to be a little, you got to win hearts and minds of the company, et cetera. But if you're doing something really well, like blow it out and talk about it and get some credit for it. Right. I don't think that we do that enough because that's just not natural for us to think like that initially. But we did an episode, I don't know, months ago, Nolan, on how to kind of make sure you're showcasing and talking about things and holding up on a pedestal things that you're kicking ass at.
Particularly if it's the stuff that people are poking holes in. Like, I don't feel like I'm paid fairly. It's like, all right, well, let me talk to you about how we do this here. And while like and how we're, because the assumption is if you're not talking about the fact of how you do stuff, they're assuming you're either don't know what you're doing, you're making it up. I mean, who knows what they're assuming, right? So I just feel like there's such a good way to talk about some of this stuff that we think has been taboo for so long. And it's just like this, just tell them. If you're doing it right, tell them.
And if you're doing it wrong, I've gotten up and said, listen, people, we haven't figured this out. We're kind of falling over here. Like, hold my hand, like, just trust, like, we will update you every 2 weeks. And that stops the narratives too.
It does. When I started here, I pushed for like, you know what, I'm doing a wage gap study. And when I get the results, I'm telling people. And I was like, we're going to do what? And so, and it was not perfect. It was not. And we talked about it. And I said, it's not perfect. And so, and we just released our last one and we're there. We're so close. So great. So we talked about it, but that was definitely one of those, like, what are we going to do?
Yeah. It's always amazed me how empathetic employees can actually be towards us.
If you communicate, I think that's like what both of you are getting at, which is, and Christine, you had said it before, which is when you don't communicate, people fill in gaps with the worst version of the story.
That's right.
It's a common human trait. And at scale inside of a company, I've experienced it. It's so painful when it happens because like the narrative and the soundbite gets so far down the tracks. You can't like put the horse back in the barn. Like once it's gone, it's like so gone. And trying to get people to like understand what's actually going on, if you've lost control of the narrative, I think is actually like one of the hardest parts about the job that nobody talks about.
That's right. And there's been times where it's like, we don't know the answer, right? And so, or there's no new update on something they're waiting for. I'm still telling them that. Like, I'm still getting out in front and saying, I know this is a hot topic. I don't know. And I still don't know, I think and so we've been doing a lot better at that over the last year or two. Like, we have to just tell them you don't know.
Lean into it. You got to lean into it. What you just described there, we have a term for it in my current, we call it the no update.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just like, even when you don't have an update, you need to update people about that because otherwise they're going to wonder. And when they wonder, they fill in those gaps with bad versions of the story.
They assume you do know and you're just not telling them.
Yeah. So true.
Yes, 100%.
So true. All right, let's talk about AI. So AI is like coming, it seems like every single day now I'm seeing new tools and I'm hearing about new tools. And so how are you guys thinking about the AI strategy for the people team?
Yes. So this is kind of one of those areas where I've been thinking about it and talking about it for a few years. And I feel like we're just so behind where I would want to be, fully transparent, because I'm super excited about this. And we just have been doing so much catch up for other operational things that we just haven't been able to lean in on it as some of the other big companies have. But
I don't know if you're as behind as you think, Christine. I was
maybe not
at a conference this week and there was a session on AI and everyone's kind of looking at each other. Like, I think everyone thinks everyone else is doing all these things. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah. So we put stuff in place, like we've thought through things like, so for example, it would be great if we could get to a point where we could leverage AI for employee inquiries. Like, oh my gosh, we should be able to do that. How great is that? Then you start to like peel back the onion and you're like, okay, so in order to do that, in order for that to even make sense, that means all of our information for what employees' common questions are need to be really easily searchable in one way, in one form, in one thing. So that means we're going to have to put it all on this particular website, but we all have to put it in this format so it's easily found. And no, you can't just link out to something, because then if we're trying to search for it, it can't link out to that. It's got to be linked out to And then it became this like, oh my gosh, the amount of work to prepare for the AI was just exorbitant. And then that became, really difficult for like the day to day. But I do think like that is a huge area where that would be exciting if you actually have the time, like from the ground up, to really think about, here's all my people team content. How do I put it in a way that I really could leverage a tool or a system? I think that where we have started to scratch the surface is definitely on the recruiting front, which I think is like kind of the gateway, I think, for a lot of HR teams, and related to, how do you work through identifying, candidates and finding the right skill set.
Please say more. I'm actually like really interested in this, because I agree with you. I'm seeing it a lot in recruiting. Recruiting feels like the frontier for most people teams, but how are you guys deploying it? And what are the problems you're solving?
Yeah, we're still really early onset, just coming. But it really is a matter of like, how do you source through candidates, right? How do you source through and do, top level searches for one-liners or skills and such? And then how do you assess like certain elements of how folks code? How do you assess like certain elements of that as part of an initial front? But it's super early, and it's really in kind of research mode, kind of like how we're trying to deploy it. Yeah.
I'm curious. I've been talking to other leaders about this, and one of the things that's been coming up in the last like 10 days as it relates to AI and recruiting is the top of the funnel. And for companies around your stage, what I'm starting to hear is like, we think that this is the future, is this basically like essentially replacing the recruiter screen with some version of AI. Do you think like, you're like, yes, like I want that? Or how, like, are you thinking like, like we can deploy it in more subtle ways?
I think that regarding AI, whatever winds up happening, it has to, we have one of my favorite principles is beauty works better. One of our 9 principles, too many, but anyway. And it's this concept of like, you want to obviously come up with a solve. You want to find the best solution, but you really can't do it too quickly. You really have to figure out the best way to apply. So I think there could be a future, and it's likely where we're going, to be honest, where there might be that initial phase of funnel that might be purely AI based, right? But it can't be and I think that would work, but you can't set it and forget it, right? It has to be like a methodology of what are you doing and how are you sourcing, and making sure that there's an audit capability to make sure that, I feel like you would have to, in some sort of, I just wouldn't want to set it and just say, good to go. There'd be so many things that could go wrong with that, right? You really have to test it. Like, would you do it and then have a sample of a certain amount of, a person? I want you to go through the ones that were rejected, go through 50, make sure there wasn't any that we went through that was clearly something that you would have considered based on the story that's in the resume and not the words we missed. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there could be a way that you could do it, but I do fear there are pieces that you could miss, particularly if you just let it go on its own. I do think, though, that there might be a future where it works when candidates are at that point where they know that's exactly how it's going to read, and they've all adapted their resume to the way it would need to go. You know what I mean? So I feel like
what an interesting take. Totally.
they're going to do it too. I mean, they're already using it to create their resume. So what's the difference? What's important to this company? Let me look up their principles. Let me look up their strategy. Let me look up the stuff that's important. AI, please create a resume that has these words.
Yeah, you're totally right though about the candidate, like that. I had not thought about it that way, but you're 100% spot on that we're not far off from candidates expecting it to be part of the experience, especially at the top of the funnel, because that's like the most reasonable place to deploy it, just to make you feel potentially a little bit better about the stuff that you can miss with AI. We're having this discussion right now with autonomous vehicles, and already we know autonomous vehicles are safer than humans. But like, if an autonomous vehicle kills a human, everyone's gonna be like, it's one person too many, but we deal with like 50,000 a day or something. It's like crazy how high deaths are with. And so it's kind of similar, because like, if we all are intellectually honest about the top of the funnel, when you get a resume today for 99.8% of ATSs, it just goes in chronological order. We don't look at all of them. The bucket's an absolute disaster. And so like, any sort of improvement here is going to actually be better than most experiences.
Yeah. I agree.
That's super interesting.
And I think for me, just one of my big takeaways, Christine, you said, is that I don't think a lot of teams have crossed this bridge yet, because we're all talking about, wouldn't it be great if and when we can do this and this with AI? The work to get there, that's a whole nother fucking ball game. I think that was the first F-bomb any of us had said, by the way, on this episode. But
yeah, Kelli kept it real. It is one of those situations though, to where like, I think right now, Christine, you're in the same situation as everyone else, which is like, nobody's really deployed it in a meaningful way. But we are now starting to like tangibly feel and believe in like the next frontier of it. And this is like a perfect example. I think the knowledge base is like another one of those perfect examples. Like, we can all see and feel that. Your point around the knowledge base was interesting though, because I think, we get caught up in like, oh my God, what is the end state and how are people going to use this, when we forget about like, how much work is it going to take to deploy this thing? And is that cost benefit worth it? And I think right now you're actually figuring out exactly what my friends are figuring out. Just like, we'll just kind of wait until this next version of it gets better and it's easier for us to deploy.
And I don't think that a lot of folks are aware of the work to make this perfect utopia like easy. It's a haul.
So I find it interesting too, like when I'm talking to some of like folks on my team, or like we're having like career conversations about what I want to do next, and like for particularly folks like in the people operations arena, like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, you know what? I want to make sure you're not afraid of this. Lean in, learn, it's coming. And I think this is going to be like a huge niche for people from a skills perspective on how do you leverage AI and leverage it well. And like, there's so many, I think this could be a really cool.
Yeah. Some companies are already anointing roles or people to focus on figuring this out, which makes total sense.
It does. Absolutely.
Christine, this has been a blast. We're so grateful for you taking the time. You guys are absolutely killing it right now at Hashi, and we wish you nothing but success moving in the future.
Thank you so much. This was super fun and just an honor to be able to chat with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine.
You're one of the heretics now.
Yes.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.